Yeah.
So, good morning. Hello, everyone. Uh, so, this is Dr. Murad Canbulut, and we are very excited to be here with you. This is the first seminar of the Business School Global Lecture Series. And before starting the presentation, our Dean, Professor Ercan Geges, will have the screen to have an introduction speech.
Good morning, everybody. Don't worry that I'm not going to talk a very long time. I just want to say good morning to everybody, and I'm very glad that this is the first one of our business school global lectures series, and we are starting with a very important topic. Periodically, we will be talking about some important business topics. This time, we will be talking about searching for ethical leadership in the organization. And we will have very important people with us. Today, we have Dr. Shazia Rehman Khan from Pakistan. I am very happy that she is here with us, and I believe that her guidance on this matter will help us to understand ethical issues in international business and organizations and every international climate. Murat Hoca will be moderating the conference webinar. So I just want to thank you, all of you, for attending this event, and I'm leaving the voice to Murat Hoca. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Geges. And I'd like to say something before starting the first webinar of the Global Business Lecture Series. So first of all, I'd like to thank Professor Ercan Geges for his support. That we have a chance to start with his great support, and I'd like to thank him. And secondly, I would like to thank Ms. Hande Dizdaroğlu for her great efforts with organizing and everything about the system and everything for everything. And another thank goes to Dr. Shazia, and she's the first participant. She's the first presenter of this global lecture series. I would like to thank her for contribution. First, I'm going to make an introduction to the presentation, just giving you some information about the framework and just about Dr. Shazia. Our guest, Dr. Shazia, is from Bahria University, from Bahria Business School, from Pakistan, and she's teaching on leadership, business ethics, and meaningful work. And actually, to be honest, these words, these took really my attention, and in the further minutes or in the further presentations, I will be glad to hear something about what meaningful work means. And the last topic is critical perspectives on organization and leadership. Okay, and today's presentation will be on searching for ethical leadership in the organization. And in my opinion, as a professor giving lectures on ethics and social responsibility, and I find very important talking about ethics actually in that age. In addition to ethics, leadership concept is a very important concept, keyword in today's organizations, in our lives. And I think and I hope she's going to bring these two important concepts together, and we will have a chance to listen to her in a minute. So that's all from me. I made the introduction, and Dr. Shazia have the screen. Let's say it. She has the screen, and thank thank you again for your contributions and thank you for your participation, all participants attending that first webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Murad, for having me here. And I would like to, before I start my talk, I would like to introduce myself.
Just a second. Can you share your slide with us again?
Sure.
Okay.
Just give me a minute. Okay. I guess. Can you see it now? Can you see my slides now?
No, not yet. Just
All right. Wait.
Can you try again?
Now? Yes, I just said, I guess.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So before I start my talk, I would like to introduce myself. Benim Adem Dr. Shazia Rehman Khan, and I am from Bahria University, Islamabad, Pakistan. And I would like to take this opportunity to say thanks to Dr. Murad and Ms. Hande for providing me this opportunity, and to the Dean of the Business School at Bahria University. And I extend this my gratitude to this university, Bahria University, for providing me this opportunity to talk to all of you. The topic of today's talk is searching for ethical leadership in the organization. And before I talk about ethical leadership, I would like first to, talk about leadership and ethics as in two different things. When we talk about leadership, when we try to understand leadership, it's basically, there are multiple definitions of leadership, and there are multiple styles of leadership if you study it from social scientific perspective. There are around 79 to 80 definitions alone in the social scientific tradition of leadership. But basically, there's a consensus that it's a process, whether if you're seeing leadership as a process, or even if an individual, then it's a process of influence, and it includes responsibility. The kind of influence we are talking about is the influence that leaders and followers exert over each other. Okay? And the responsibility part is taking responsibility. A leader takes responsibility not for his or her own actions, but the action of other people. So it's very important to understand the idea that what leadership involves. And when it comes to ethics, then it's a study of knowing what is right and what is wrong. Now, because ethics is basically a part of philosophy, so lots of leanings of social sciences, and even when you're talking about ethics from religious perspective, it's towards philosophy, because it has this normative tone. This particular word has this normative tone. The word ethics itself, is grounded in two words. Ethics as in Greek, which means character, and mores from Latin, that means custom. So somehow these things are included when we are talking about ethics. Now, ethics is studied from three different perspectives mainly. Ethical leadership is studied from the vantage point of religion, which focuses on organizational legitimacy, of course, because if you're talking about certain religion, then it has, a kind of approval or kind of branding to it. It also involves extraordinary holiness, and recently there has been understanding that a religious leader, a religious ethical leader, should also has a certain kind of dialogue with, and starts dialogue with other religious traditions. So it's important to include other people and other religions into, and start talking with them to come to common values, so that we can improve the condition of peace in the world. Also, its focus is on non-violence, being non-violent, because religion has been used in throughout the history. We have seen that religion has been used in the name of, for being to perpetuate violence as well. So that's why the focus of ethical leadership from religious perspective is on these certain ideas. When it comes to ethical leadership and philosophy, that is the main part of ethics. When we study ethics, then it sees ethical leadership as a complex moral relationship between people who are involved in this relationship, that are followers and leaders. It is based on trust, and it includes certain kind of obligations and certain kind of rights and obligations that being in a relationship creates on other people. It also talks about certain emotions, and it's very important to understand that the leader and follower, they have a shared vision of the good, that is a good purpose that they want to achieve, that they have a shared purpose and they want to achieve it. So from ethical leadership, from the philosophical point of view, is basically focused on these things. Now, when we come to social scientific tradition, and we try to see how ethical leadership is understood in social sciences, then we see the most popular definition of ethical leadership sees ethics as a demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct, where normative is not as something as we understand it as in philosophy, that is something as an ideal, but here the normative means something that is dependent on the morality of a society. Here, normative means behavioral standards of a particular society. So the demonstration of normatively appropriate conduct is basically more towards custom than towards, some ethical ideals. Still, it's very important to see that because ethics itself comes with, it's a very normatively laden, word. It comes with certain standards. You cannot differentiate between right and wrong if you do not have a standards of right and wrong. And for that, certain standards, you need to depend on certain kind of ideals. So it's important to understand that this particular normative appropriate conduct is also dependent on certain kind of ideals, and it should depend on certain kind of ideals. Then it also involves personal actions of a leader and interpersonal relationships of a leader. And most importantly, it talks about promoting ethical conduct to followers through two-way communication, that it involves language and communication through reinforcement, that is depending on organizational rewards and punishments, and a leader presenting oneself as a role model of ethical actions. Okay, so from social scientific perspective, the focus of ethical leadership remains on these kind of variables or values. Because in business, we mainly study ethical leadership. We mainly study even leadership from the perspective of social sciences, because mainly management sciences is in the domain of social sciences. Then the main focus of this tradition is to understand whether how do we study ethical leadership, that is in this tradition, how does it affect the way we understand organizations and the relationship in it. If you look at the latest trends of studying ethical leadership in different fields from the three perspectives that I just identified, in the last 3 years, we can see that research in the field of ethical leadership from the perspective of social sciences continuously on the increase, including this year, but because this year is not ended yet, so that's why you can see that as compared to other years, still the number is you can add up more. By the end of this year, we may have more researchers in ethical leadership. So if you can see that ethical leadership and social sciences, researchers are dominantly trying to study ethical leadership in the social sciences. But the problem is that before studying ethical leadership in the organization, we must understand the context of the organization, where it is practiced. In the organization, organizations are mainly run on the two rules, that is efficiency and effectiveness. That is, we teach in business schools, okay? And that is how people come to understand organization, and that is the way organizations are run. That is efficiency, to use minimum resources to get to good results, and that one is effectiveness, reaching goals that an organization sets for itself. And to do that, to do things effectively and efficiently, an organization uses authority and control over people, authority of certain people over other people, and controlling other people's behavior in the organization. So basically, organization is the mechanism through which an organization gets to its goal is through authority and control. The main focus of the organization remains on organizational outcomes. It's important to see that in this context, we are talking about ethical leadership and followership in this context of the organization. So leadership and leader-follower relationship here in this context is based on hierarchy and power imbalance. When we look at hierarchy and power imbalance and we talk about ethical relationship, then it's important to recognize that an ethical relation involves equality and respect. mutual, recognition of each other, which demands equality. Here, the hierarchy in the organization and the power imbalance in the organization somehow make this relationship antagonistic. If you just remove the terms of leader and follower and replace it with manager and subordinate, you can see that this relationship remains antagonistic because of the divergent interest of the people. Because one group, sees their interest in something else, and the leader or manager sees their interest in something else. So there's a problem when we bring in hierarchy and power imbalance, and we are talking about ethical leadership. Before I move on and to identify the particular problem that ethical leadership can have on followers' outcome, it's important to see that how moral development of an individual occur. To a person to be morally developed, there are certain things that are required. First of all, for our moral development to occur, we need autonomy. Autonomy means that we have independent power to have independent decision making. And if that independent decision making is somehow undermined in a context, then it's difficult for a person to grow morally in that environment. So when we are talking about autonomy, it means that having independent decision making and that you can decide on your own about what is right and wrong, and then you can act it out. This is how people grow morally. And it's very important to understand autonomy in order to understand the concept of responsibility. Because if you are not autonomous, then you're also not morally responsible for your action. Because for moral responsibility, if you want to keep someone or have someone morally responsible for their actions, then it's important that they must have done, this action through their own free will. They must have decided things through their own free will. So freedom is a very important concept in ethics and ethical relationship. And when we are talking about ethical leadership and followership, then we should ask ourselves whether in this relationship, does follower have moral responsibility for the actions that they are doing in the organization? Okay. When it comes to motivation, for a morally developed person, it is also important to have, this intrinsic motivation to do good. For our moral motivation, most of the time, 80% of this, I guess, this world population, they are all motivated to do good things. It's not that maybe the way we understand good may be different from each other, okay? But at the same time, no one, I guess people do not decide that they want to do something bad in this world. So this is the kind of motivation that comes from within. It's a kind of intrinsic motivation. So this motivation is very important to have if we want to go from a decision to an action. This moral motivation plays a very important role. Then, as we were talking about moral character, how do we build a moral character? How do we build people with good moral character? Then there is one concept that is related to it that is called moral identity. When we are talking about moral identity, it's like something that you recognize some moral characteristics as your core values, as something that defines yourself, and you want to keep it consistent. For example, if you see yourself as an honest person, if you identify yourself with honesty, then you want to remain consistent, keep your identity consistent, and then you will be an honest person. You will speak honestly. So moral identity is it's also a category, and in itself it's also an ideal that we want to achieve and that we want to keep ourselves consistent with. Another important thing to be morally developed is to be empathetic. There is so much pain and problems in this world that if we do not understand the perspective of other people and why people are in such pain and why people, even if they do bad things, what were the circumstances that trigger such actions? So empathy, I guess it's very important to understand people, to understand people's life from their own perspective. It's a very difficult thing to do. It's very demanding. At the same time, to become a kind organization, to have a kind society where people can take care of each other. It also involves ethics of care, where people take care of each other. But to be empathetic is very important. It also asks us to to be less judgmental. It also asks us to be, to somehow slow our process of coming to decisions about others' morality very quickly. So empathy, autonomy, responsibility, motivation, identity, and empathy. These are the basic foundations of a morally good person. And it is required for a person to be morally developed in the organization or morally developed in the life, or in particular when we're talking about organization. Now, we should question here that because there's this basic assumption when we're talking about ethical leadership, and we have just identified in the definition from the social scientific perspective, that it somehow, leads people towards moral outcomes. Followers, leaders lead people, subordinates towards moral outcomes in the organization. This is the goal of ethical leadership. But when we are talking about this basic assumption of leadership, now we know that what is required for people to develop morally in the organization. We must ask this: does a leader have a role in developing moral employees? And in particular, does moral management used by ethical leaders interfere with their subordinates' moral development? These two questions will, frame our talk further. When we are identifying the problematic issues in the ethical leadership and how it affects their followers, it's very important to understand that leader and follower is basically a relationship. Okay, and when we are talking about ethics, it's basically for a relationship. How do we survive socially, and how do we, how do we present ourselves and do good in a relationship with other people? So ethical leadership and followership involves a relationship. But the problematic issues in ethical leadership in the context of organization is when you combine authority and morality. Somehow, when we're talking about leadership is a phenomena where people choose among themselves the one person that can, and people sanction that person to lead them or to fight for their interests on their behalf, and they leave the decision making to that person. That followers are the one who sanction people to lead them. Okay, but in the organization, as organizations are not run on the democratic principles, we do not elect our leaders in the organization. So it's very problematic that there's this person in the authoritative position, and somehow people start seeing that person, or somehow that person starts seeing themselves as ethical leaders. The problem it has is that this is not something that all the people have opted for, and the person who's sitting at some authoritative position may start, coloring organization with his or her own morality. The main problem here is that what if that person who is your supervisor, manager, or someone in authoritative position does not understand what is right and wrong, but still, because that person has certain kind of authority, and because he or she sees himself as morally right, someone who knows what is right and wrong, then that person starts doing, inculcate his own or her own view of morality into the followers and the way organizations are run. So somehow the idea of ethical leadership is confounded. It confounds the idea of authority and morality in the organization, and that is very problematic. And based on the same authority, it is important to understand that the leader here has certain kind of power, and the power, the moral management of employees comes with the power. Of course, if you have the power to distribute punishments and rewards in the organization, that is how you are morally managing your employees. Having this power imbalance in the organization somehow distorts the relationship, the ethical relationship between people, because it's not based on equality. It's not something that you are not respecting other people. You are not seeing them as a moral agent, someone who can come up with moral actions or moral decision on their own. You're somehow undermining their morality. So this idea of moral management is very problematic, because in doing so, in practicing certain kind of ethical leadership in the organization, you stop seeing other people as moral agent. You stop seeing other people as morally independent of each other. Though we are not completely morally independent of each other, of course, we influence each other's morality, but it does not necessarily it is not necessary that we are influenced by someone who is our supervisor. It can be our friend, it can be someone else in the organization. So the idea of authority and moral management of employees is very problematic, and it involves organization, rewards and punishment. It also involves language and communication. So when we are talking about giving out your messages, moral messages to the employees and reinforcing through communication channels, then the kind of channels you are using and the kind of language you are using, the kind of words you are using, they will be imbued with power, because power in the organization is the main, tool through which people respond to other people's demand. So it's important to see that this relationship between leader and follower, which has certain moral obligations that is being created on both follower and leader, somehow it is muddied and dirtied here because of these things, because of the power imbalance in authority and moral management of employees. To understand that the kind of influence, how we have just identified that how people develop morally, that is, it requires free will, and for moral responsibility to occur, it depends on one's autonomy. Okay, so a person who is not autonomous in his or her decisions cannot be blamed for it. Okay, if there are some untoward outcomes that occur in the organization. So for the persons to be autonomous and to be morally responsible, they must have this autonomy. They must come to their moral actions and decisions on their own. Only in that cases, when things are done with knowledge and free will, and there's coercion, and then you can make people responsible for their actions. So ethical leadership has certain kind of negative influence when you're talking about follower outcomes. And the irony is that the relationship between a leader and follower is basically a moral relationship that requires, to always to be focused on your follower's outcome. That's why when we are outlining the context of the organization, when we were discussing that's why it's important to say that the leader here is committed to organizational goals and not the followers' goal. Here, followers are means to get to the organizational goals. So the idea of undermining people's free will and is equal to undermining their autonomy and responsibility in the organization. The problems for followers' moral outcomes, ethical leadership has negative influence on moral development of employees, because the same way when we were talking about, because people are not able to make their own decisions, people are not coming up with their own sense of right and wrong, because somehow someone sitting at the top, that is the person who is pushing people towards this thing, to be good and to do good. Even in that circumstances, when we are talking about moral development, first your autonomy is undermined. Then when it comes to moral motivation, if you go to the idea of moral motivation crowding theory, it explains that for the reasons, for the actions that we have intrinsic motivation to start with, okay, and around, suppose that there are 60 to 70% population of this world who want to do good in their life. Okay, so we all have this kind of intrinsic motivation to do good in the world. So this is the kind of motivation that is internal to us, that is part of our nature, and when we want to do good. But when this motivational crowding theory explains that when you start rewarding people externally for the things that they are initially intrinsically motivated for, then somehow people will not be intrinsically motivated for that particular action in the long run. They will stop it altogether, or they will start depending on extrinsic motivation. The problem is that how long can an organization can use organizational rewards and punishment for their employees to be moral and to come to good ends. And it is not possible for an organization to maintain employees' morality in the long run. So here you're undermining people's moral motivation by practicing ethical leadership, because you are not recognizing that moral motivation is a kind of motivation that is intrinsic. Okay? And when we start giving rewards and punishment for it, particularly rewards, then it becomes very problematic. Also, it has practicing ethical leadership can lead to problematic outcomes for one's moral responsibility. Because if you're following a certain version, a certain kind of morality, I'm not saying that morality is not something that is absolute in sense. Of course, everybody recognizes that honesty is very important, and being honest is very important. Keeping your promises is very important. These things that are the things that people recognize, but still, people must come to in situation to situation from one context to another. In different situations in an organization, people must come to decide what they want to do on their own. So there must not be a kind of coercion or pressure on people when we're talking about their autonomy and free will and their moral responsibility. That's why the idea of ethical leadership in particular is very problematic in the organization, that you're giving someone a duty for other people's action, particularly moral action, that should not be the responsibility of a leader. Okay, so the idea of ethical leadership in social sciences, when we discuss it in social sciences, is very problematic for followers' outcome, and this is the main outcome that leadership commits itself to. Leadership commits itself to when we talk about the relationship. To start with the relationship of leaders and followers, we should ask here, what should we do instead? If we are not, if ethical leadership is not helping us out, if ethical leadership is getting to organizational goals, but the means it is using to get to organizational goals are ethically problematic, and it exerts certain negative influences on followers' moral outcomes, then what should we do instead? Before I talk about trust and respect, it's very important to see that before joining an organization, people must be ethically trained. So that's why the role of our schools, universities, colleges becomes very important. That people should be ethically trained to see the problem of the kind of problem they may face in different circumstances, in different contexts, the ethical problems that comes with being in a power relationship. And there are multiple kinds of other problems that may come from joining any organization. So people must be trained before they join certain organization, they must be trained for it. Now, in the organization, what we can do, in the organization, we must focus on the development of trust and respect. Because when we're talking about leaders and followers, it's very important to understand the idea of trust. Without having trust in a relationship, nothing can be built in that relationship. No outcome can be achieved. So having the trust of your followers, or people, leaders will be able to trust their followers, and followers will be able to trust their leaders. It requires a sense of vulnerability. It requires you to be vulnerable in front. It requires the leader to be vulnerable to their followers, because leader is the one who initiates the process of trust building in the organization. Leader is the one who sheds his or her own power to get to the level of followers, to make them understand, to make them see him or his or her faults. It's very important. It's very risky at the same time, and that's why, because it somehow undermines your authority. That's why I'm saying that the idea of ethical leadership in the organization is very problematic, because you are asking too much from a leader. But the development of trust and respect is very important to establish an ethical relationship in the organization among people who are working as colleagues and as equals and as equal moral agents. Then the idea of respect is very important. Mainly in collective societies, the idea of respect is understood as something we understand as in patriarchy. But the idea of respect is basically about treating other people as you want to be treated yourself, treating other people equally. Suppose if a leader thinks that he or she can decide what is good and what is bad on his or her own, then he must be able to think the same way about other people, think the same way about his or her subordinates, that they are the ones who can decide what is good for them and what is not good for them, not only good for them, but for all the society or the organization that is involved in whatever the duties and responsibilities they have. Having all that, they can decide that. So if you're doing that, if you can do that in the organization, then you're respecting, other people in the organization. Then another thing we are talking about is empathy development in the organization. Normally, we are very quick to judge other people in the organization. organization. We are very quick to punish other people's actions, and it's very problematic when we do not try to understand the perspective of other people when it comes to morality and empathy development in the organization. Without having certain kind of, without understanding others' perspective, we may become a very unkind we may become unkind people. So it's important that the kind of what is the focus of the organization? Do you want to develop or maintain people's morality? Do you see them as moral people? Because if you start exercising control in the organization and somehow you bring ethics in it, then you must understand that freedom, respect, dignity, integrity, these are the empathy, these are the basic things that we must have in an organization in order for it to be morally good organization. And this is it from me. And I thank you all for your time. Tashakkur Ederem. And I would like to answer your questions now. Thank you so much.
Dr. Shazia, thank you very much for your presentation. I already told you that this really attracted me very much because I am really interested in business ethics. And from that perspective, I'm just trying to put myself on the screen. From that perspective, and I have some questions for you, if it's okay for you. And I'm going to have some questions.
Sure.
Maybe it's going to make a summary for the participants. And so you just shared that the ethical leadership is becoming a trend, right? So you have some figures on a table, and the statistics were showing that the ethical leadership is becoming a trend in the social sciences. So as a marketer, as a marketing guy, it makes me confused when I see something becoming a trend. Okay, I'm just questioning it. So what we should think about, the topic is becoming a trend. So is it becoming a trend because of its increasing importance, or it's attractive? So it sounds very good, interesting, attractive. So this is why many scholars, many researchers are really interested in that ethical leadership subject topic.
Okay. Dr. Murad, as you identified, that if something is becoming a trend, there may be two reasons. And you have identified the right things. That may be because ethical leadership is very important. The idea of ethical leadership is very important. And because there are organizations, multiple times you find organizations involving in bad stuff. There are many examples of the organizations that when they are doing unethical things, okay, and it has certain consequences on the society. So the idea of ethical leadership is very important in the organization. But at the same time, from the social scientific perspective, I guess people are looking at ethics very superficially. Because it is becoming a trend, and because people see it's a very easy thing to use a scale and, just to use that scale and come to, just quantify that particular relationship, it's very problematic. So I guess mainly the main output of the research is they depend on certain kind of a scale to measure these things. This particular approach to research is also problematic. At the same time, the idea of ethical leadership is a very beautiful idea. It's the idea that inspires us all. And I guess that's somehow it rings a bell somewhere, with our spirituality and our morality cell. That's why I guess there's a lot of research in it.
Okay, thank you very much. And I have another question.
Sure.
You know that I already told you that I have a couple of questions for you because these topics are really interesting. So my question is about the business life, real life. Okay, so we know that we have some great leaders, great CEOs today, like Jeff Bezos from Amazon, Elon Musk from Tesla. So we know that these guys increase their wealth before, during, and after COVID-19 pandemic, right? So they are being also questioned about their ethical behaviors, right? So we know that Musk is doing great work, okay, trying to contribute to human welfare, future, environmental sustainability, and as well, Jeff Bezos is doing great work, okay. Amazon is a great company known everywhere, okay, in Pakistan, in Turkey, in the anywhere else. We know Jeff Bezos and the Amazon company. So can we call these guys, these people, as ethical leaders? So who is becoming examples for in their organizations and the human beings as well? Okay, this is just kind of a tricky question, I think, and we know the results because I can see your face smiling a bit, and I know that the followers, the attendants, also participants are also smiling when I talking about Bezos ethical leadership, Musk ethical leadership. I'm just wondering your opinions about that topic.
I guess Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk can be taken as cannot be taken as ethical leaders, because the kind of relationship they have with their employees. You must have known that recently the employees of Amazon, they have protested because the kind of treatment they have been receiving in their own organization. So I guess it's very important. Yes, you can see them as very successful people, people of great wealth, and people who are contributing to the future of humanity. If they want to see, they have set certain goals for them. But being ethical leader, as we see that the ethical leadership involves certain kind of relationship with your subordinates and followers, I think that thing is absent there. I will not label them as ethical leaders, but yes, they are successful. Okay. That's why I'm saying that the idea of ethical leadership in the organization is quite problematic.
Okay, thank you very much. And Professor Geges has questions for you. And
sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. I wonder something. We have global firms around the world, and you know that being a leader in a domestic business is difficult, and being a leader in a global business is much more difficult than the other one. Also, being an ethical leader is even more difficult than anything else. So, you know that there are different people from different cultures, and do you think that it is going to be very complex to be an ethical leader in a global company with people from very different cultures around the world? So how are we going to achieve this, being an ethical leader in a global company?
I guess, Professor, that it's very important to somehow see that's when we were talking about religious ethical leadership. I guess the thing that they are doing, that they start talking that other kind of traditions, other religious traditions. The same way, a global ethical leader, someone who aspires for that, should start the kind of dialogue and with other cultures, because if you're talking about that ethics can differ from one culture to other and people may have different understanding of ethics, then we are in a very complex situation. But if we can identify a few values that all people, all cultures have consensus on, then I guess we can build global ethical leadership on that. So I guess it's very important to identify the main values that we all, want to have in our own lives and want to see in other people. I guess that is the answer of it. We need to identify certain values, and we need to have consensus on these values. Only then, from then, we can move towards global ethical leadership. Otherwise, it's a very, we are in very muddy waters.
Thank you.
So we have some questions from the participants. Let me ask you these questions. We have 3 questions, and the participant wonders if you have the chance to look at these issues in practice, either in your country or in some other place. And what do you think about the Pakistan's position in terms of organizational ethics? Do you think the country is in a top rank country in terms of organizational ethics, or I think we have the answer, but I'm wondering your answer.
I guess the main, when it comes to ethics, our main hope remains with the entrepreneurs, with the people who are striving for new types of organization, new kind of business. They are committed to, being socially responsible, and there are the young kids who are just out of university and trying to, build their business. I guess if we are trying to find, or if we want to label someone as ethical leaders, these are the ones, because these are the ones who are seeing the future of the humanity. Because if you talk about, well-positioned organization and big organization, I guess it's a very problematic idea. I don't think our organization as well-positioned to be, to present themselves as ethical organization, or to say that they practice ethical leadership in the organization.
Okay, the second question is that about the rankings, as we know that we have that many rankings are published and shared with us. And do you think these international rankings, such as corruption index, transparency index, or some other ethical indexes, show the performance of countries in terms of organizational ethics? Let me explain it a bit. So, for example, when we see the transparency index, for example, that we know that there are many colors starting from green to the red, and does it give any idea about the ethics, organizational ethics, for example? What do you think about this?
I guess particularly when we are talking about Transparency International, there's such organizations that rank different countries on ethics. I guess it's important to see that what they are actually measuring. They're actually measuring the perception of that particular country or people about their own organizations. Like I just said, that I do not perceive the organizations of my own country as very ethical organization. I see a lot of chance of improvement. Likewise, because it comes with experience. Because I have experienced many things in the organizations, dealing with them. So being part of a culture, being part of a country, you understand how do ethics play out in your particular context. I guess Transparency International, when it measures that, yes, it tries somehow, identify something which is problematic and the areas of improvement for all of us. I guess we can, educate us. If we see them something, they do tell us something about ethics.
Okay, the last question, and we are still looking forward to having more questions. The participant is from Pakistan, as we see in the question. Do you think that you mentioned some practices, how to organize or how to construct organizational, ethical organizations? Do you think these practices are applied in Pakistan? And the participants' experience show, 3-year experience show, working at a bank has made the person observe that the banking industry is very toxic for majority of the workers.
Yes.
What do you think about this?
I guess it can be applied, but at the same time, before applying something, people should value these things, these values. So it's very important, I guess, to train leaders or to train people who run these organizations ethically. That's where the part of ethical training, comes. So it's important for people to understand the kind of context they build for other people to work in. There are many organizations, including banking sector, that has certain toxic work environment for subordinates and generally for employees, and it's really problematic. And this problem is not only limited to Pakistan. Even if you study Amazon's culture, it's a very toxic culture. So I guess this is our common problem, that in the organization, because the organization is focused on certain goals, certain organizational goals, and profit is one of them. So I guess that answers our question, that it's difficult, it's applicable, but it's important to identify the value of these things before we can apply them. And the people who can apply these things in an organization are the ones who are sitting at the top. So I guess we need to educate them. This is what we can do.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to say anything to add? And then if there is nothing to add, I'll be concluding, informing our participants, and then we'll be saying goodbye. Would you like to say anything?
I would like to say again, Tashakkar Ederim. I would like to say thank you to all of you and for giving me your time, your precious time, and you listen to me. And I'm very thankful for that. That's very important for me. And I'm really delighted for having this opportunity. And I hope that in future, this is just the start, and in future we have lots of things to learn from each other. And this is it. And I'm thankful to Bahria University and to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you. We thank you very much.
So I would like to thank you as well. And before concluding, before turning off the record, I would like to inform all the participants that the session is being recorded. And I'm sorry, I just forgot it when we started the recording. And this session, this webinar is being recorded. And if you have any questions, or if you don't want to do it be shared with anyone else, please let us know. And this will be shared in social media accounts if everything is okay with that issue. That I'd like to inform you with that issue. Because we just talked about being ethical people, we just talked about ethical organizations, but I forgot that this is a private issue, privacy issue, and I'm sorry that I forgot to let you know about the record privacy issues. And thank you for all participating in that presentation. I would like to thank you, Dr. Shazia, for your contribution. I hope we will do more interesting presentations, webinars in the following weeks. So that's all from us. Hope to see you very soon. Take care of yourself. Don't forget wearing your masks. I'd like to say that. Take care of yourself. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.